Hello and welcome back to Parley, my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. This one is from EyePatchNotes, hope you'll enjoy listening. It's eardrums and layered listening, a little music analysis themed Parley, also part of your series on being inspired to make things. We previously talked about that AI generated song in one of your Parley. This is connected to that too. We're going to talk about the nature of interpreting and enjoying music, the relationship that music theory, like formalized music analysis, has with interpreting music, and also how this can affect your own desire to create music, or like how you're motivated to make a song based on the way you enjoy music. There is a really interesting way you've laid out in this Parley about how you can enjoy music in sort of two different categories of way I hadn't thought of before. One where it's sort of about the different things that happen in the music, like different melodies or riffs, but also another that's like just modulating those different things. You can get a lot of mileage out of that, and those songs can sound similar on the surface, but it can be very different to interpret them. It's pretty interesting. I really like that part of this Parley. So let's get into it. You actually wrote a summary, so I'll also read yours now too. Even without formal definitions, EyePatchNotes begins, a willing listener can compare liked songs to find where they overlap. From there, that listener can use that overlap to find new songs, or compose their own. Maybe. Let's give an example. Seems solid enough to me. Revisiting, there's a bunch of music in the description. This song is called Stronghold Land Eater. It's a boss fight from a video game that we've been talking about before. It can be said EyePatchNotes is inclined toward music they understand. Not via ironclad music theory or language, but in pattern recognition. We'll get back to that. This typically comes in the form of music being divisible by 4 or 8. We'll get back to that too, but like presumably in 4/4 or some similar time signature, sure. Breaking down the deep drums in the opening leg or phase 1 of Stronghold Land Eater. Yes, this is a piece of boss music, and so it's 3 minutes, and about 1.5 minutes through it sort of changes phase, right? So from the beginning of the song, this song is really interesting. Stronghold Land Eater is a piece of video game boss fight music, and so, it's not going to be to the forefront of the player's attention. And so one of the interesting things about this song as an example is that it uses vocals in it has lyrics, but they're not really the focus piece of the song. And this is somewhat uncommon, I think you'll agree. Sometimes dubstep comes to mind, but like some types of music use vocals as like an accent or an instrument, sure. And you also have things like a choir in this piece of music too, actually, that sure, often in the background like an instrument, but I mean like lyrics, spoken words, a significant amount of spoken words. Not a lot in this song, but it's a little bit of a weird, anyway, if you listen to it, you'll probably see what I mean. And so it fragments them quite a bit. And the kind of message of the song is sort of broken up. There's the beginning of the drum beat, and the song goes, I fight again, heal but I run in circles, but I couldn't do it because I was doing the drum line for you. I can't really visually or vocally represent this music any more clearly than that. You did a really good job in the prompt, EyePatchNotes. That's the best I can do. The line is, I fight again, heal but I run in circles. And then later they're going to add, I don't want to fight again. They say that time can heal all wounds, is implied, but I run in circles. And it's a boss fight. We're in phase 1. Can you imagine how this could be thematically relevant? Probably you can, It's for a piece of boss music. You're focusing on fighting the boss. To get its message across, it's going to need to be more explicit. This is kind of already true of lyrics in some ways. Compared to poetry is similar to the lyrics of music, right? Poetry can sometimes be a little bit less directly direct. I think it's still bad if a poem is just purposefully obtuse, but a poem can sometimes use somewhat more complicated imagery to show something beautiful, but it's not like instantly clear what they're talking about because you read it on a page and you can go back and look back again. The next time you read a book or a poem or anything really, you read a chunk of text, watch yourself reading it and check how often you jump back to read something that you read before. It kind of depends who you are, and I'm aware this is also an attentive style thing, like different people read in different patterns. It can be shockingly nonlinear. Like it really matters that you kind of have those materials there, and it's sort of a mistake to impose this idea that written piece of text is this linear thing that happens in a set order. The interesting thing is about writing a piece of text is you kind of give the audience all the materials right there. It's like performing a play, but you somehow simultaneously show the audience a very large amount of the play all at once, but still perform it in order. That's a weird thing about writing things down. This is obviously then not true of music when you listen to it. You only have that one lyric in front of you when you hear it, and then it's gone. And so if you're focusing on something else, you often need to be just much more blunt and direct with your lyrics, or have them not mean as much is an interesting, sort of the same thing, but that's an interesting topic for another time. And so obviously this music is going to want to be more direct. There is basically one line in the song, but it's broken up in an interesting way to create several meanings. It's kind of tied to the instrumentalization and pushed to the back in like a different way than you would in a lot of music. Very interesting. Asymptomatic continues. Quick reminder that "I don't want to fight again" occurs only once during phase 1 as near background vocals, right? We don't actually get the full line until later. We've kind of built up the idea, and then they bring it on home with that twist. Similarly, the linking phrase, "they say that time can heal but I run in circles" is where it's going to go, only shows up at the end of phase 2 of the song. The full track tells the story. Again, that "I don't want to fight again, they say that time can heal, but I run in circles" through repetition and choice moments of contrast. Yes, of course, a critical thing if we were to analyze or praise this song is that it's very clearly providing a message through its form. The song is going to be a little repetitive, and so they chose a message that fits that form pretty well, sure. And they also tried to tell it in a way that will be reasonable for somebody who's focusing on a video game boss fight. Cool. And so I figured the reason that you put this in the parlay at the beginning is because you feel like it's a good example of analyzing music without, like, as you said, ironclad music theory or language. And this is a really good example, I hope, for the audience, some of whom might be quite cynical about the way that people analyze literature, or I brought up poetry before. Hopefully this is a simple example of, like, this is not exactly a reach, right? The song in which the vocalist says, "I fight again, heal but I run in circles," is about feeling like you're stuck in a loop and trying to keep fighting when things seem hopeless. Hopefully we all agree, as just a baseline common ground, that's not a stretch. It's not like weird or complicated to interpret that. That is very obviously, that is what this song is trying to say. You don't have to say that that's for sure what the author or creator of the song intended. That doesn't matter. We're in Death of the Author criticism land. It is a very reasonable interpretation of the music. That's not a stretch or reach to think that that is what was meant. And that will be an important topic for this parlay. This idea that I'm sort of frustrated to see a lot in modern criticism, that it's like a weird or a stretch, or nobody really puts meaning into things. And so it's always sort of grasping if you interpret anything in any piece of art. And I think it's complicated and related to this subject. So I think that's worth breaking down for a second. EyePatchNotes, maybe to you, actually, it's less obvious where this is going related to your parlay. I promise this is relevant. On the one hand, you have people who argue that, you know, if a passage in a book says the curtains were blue and this means that it reflects the emotional state of the characters and it makes the room feel really depressing, there's a group of people that will say, no, the curtains are just blue. Why are you overcomplicating everything? Not everything is a metaphor. The curtains are just blue. And that is kind of a weird argument in some ways. Like, yes, people sometimes reach a little to create the narrative that they're reading into a piece of work. But it's okay to explain why you felt a certain way when you read a passage. I thought this room was dreary. I thought this scene was a little dreary. Well, the curtains are a melancholy blue. Could that have to do with it? Sure. The jump maybe that is a problem for these people, and for me too, I agree can be an issue, is when those people then go on to argue that that's sort of an objective truth of the work. That simply doesn't matter. It's not a matter of that being such a silly argument, in my opinion. It just doesn't matter whether that, like, is correct, if you will. Interpreting things is not about deducing the correct answer, necessarily. It's about deducing your correct answer from the perspective you brought to the work. At the same time, arguing that the author like didn't think about what any of the words they wrote do to the work is also pretty silly. I hope we'll agree. They clearly did choose for the curtains to be a certain color as opposed to another. Is it that much of a stretch to think that they like maybe thought that that color was fitting for that scene? And maybe they didn't think that, or maybe they didn't consciously think that. All completely normal answers. Just as a completely random example, I don't really know why the curtains I have are blue. When I bought them, I needed blackout curtains because there's a street light right outside and I can't go to sleep unless they're there. So I kind of feel like I probably just picked like the cheapest ones that were a dark color. At the same time, it does create very nice color contrast in the room, and I have some orange lights that I use in the evening to make my eyes relax a little bit, get me sleepy before I go to bed, read by and stuff. And the orange light with the blue curtain is very, very nice. I also think it ties the room together rather nicely. But could you say that it's a little melancholy? It makes the room a little more dreary. It adds to that green color to make it look like I'm in the Simic Combine from Magic the Gathering. I don't know. That's a little bit of a stretch, but is that completely random? Not really. I do like those two colors. I'm wearing a blue shirt. There's a ton of green decorations in the room. That's not just the color grading of my webcam. You know, and I feel like the core of this concern has something to do with this idea that the person saying it's silly to interpret things, I feel an argument in there where it's like they're afraid or nervous to kind of trust that artists intend things ever. And yes, it is a little weird if you feel like you're pulling a lot from a piece of work, and you know, because it is an inviolable truth, that you are certainly interpreting some things from that piece of work that the artist did not intend. And so you're getting it wrong in a way. And all that's happening here is the anxiety of creativity turned into an inverse, where people don't feel comfortable saying, this is what I thought about it. They feel like they want to just prove that that's what it is. And so these people are doing the reverse thing where they're saying, well, because it's ridiculous to prove that that's what's true about the piece of work, that's true. Therefore, your every claim about the piece of work is a reach. And no, false. That jump in logic is just because you, person critiquing people interpreting, are nervous about the idea that your claims about the work are not true or real. But that just doesn't matter. That's, to be blunt, that's just immature. That's not really a problem or an issue at all. Now, we move back over here. We will get to these people more in a little bit, but we do also have the flip side of this, which is people who interpret the shit out of everything and turn everything into something way more complex to break down than it otherwise would be. Now, we can dismiss some of this as masturbation. You know, this is your English professor wants to feel important, so they insist that these rhetorical devices make the work good on their own. And no, those rhetorical devices in the work are the name we use for a process which has some fun, entertaining result, and that could make the work good. But just being able to name the technical reason obviously doesn't do anything on its own. That's just our name for to remember the thing that is a technique that lots of works use. You know, a simple example is pathetic fallacy. That's the name that people often use for the thing where the environment mimics the emotions of the characters on the screen. You're probably thinking of the obvious one, which is that something sad happens, the characters break up, someone dies, and it rains. That's pathetic fallacy, or is often called pathetic fallacy. It's pathetic. That part is literal. The idea is that it's not maybe the greatest literary technique, but it can have its moments. I think subtle pathetic fallacy is often pretty solid. If it feels like the environment just kind of very quietly harmonizes with the character, like having curtains that are a slightly depressing color and then you're feeling a bit down, and that's just like maybe not the greatest thing. Could that possibly be a nice little addition to your writing? I think it can. I think this is a thing humans do. When we're in a mood, we sort of selectively notice a little more the details about our environment that are similar to that mood. This is something you'll probably have noticed. You get pessimistic when you are sad. crazy claim, I know. Hopefully that's relatable. And I think that when you write, you can depict this pretty well by just having the environment very subtly. Again, when you need to pick a kind of irrelevant detail, just make it like slightly more in line with the emotions of the characters, and sometimes that will be beneficial. You can overdo it. Most people do. That's how it got that name. As far as I remember anyway, from looking up the etymology of pathetic fallacy. Just as an aside, a very interesting technique that has become popular recently is to do the exact opposite of pathetic fallacy. So this is something horrific is happening, someone's getting brutally murdered, but it's broad daylight, it's a sunny day, that kind of thing. I don't really recommend this movie, but there's a movie called Midsommar that does this a lot. That's kind of, I would argue, that's the entire stylistic focal point of the movie, is sort of it's daylight, and that makes it sort of harder to comprehend the horror, or like it's more horrifying. Very interesting technique. I didn't really like the movie that much, but anyway, that's an example. I'm sure someone has seen that. Interesting. We will definitely be picking more on the over-interpreting people, and it's easy to dismiss them, and as easy in some ways as the people who think it's silly to interpret anything just because we can't be absolutely sure that that's what it was intended to mean, which just doesn't matter. That's not what interpreting things is. It's easy to say these people only want to seem smart interpreting things. And it's sort of the same thing, but the opposite. They're just saying, oh, but I think you can demonstrate logically exactly what the piece of work means. And I can specifically demonstrate exactly what the work logically means. Look at how smart I am. And yeah, that's silly. Like I complained about the other party. It's just immature. It's not really bad in a complicated way. That's just like, yeah, when you grow up, you won't want to do that. You won't feel the need to feel like I'm just right. Look at me. It's not that fun. It's actually really boring. I know. Ask me why I know. Because this is exactly how I thought maybe 20 years ago or so. But it's not that complicated to realize that it's just more interesting to discuss things and have there be a democracy of ideas. That's also like the real world. Anyway, I want now, though, to read a sort of comment underpinning this parlay. You might be wondering, Zandy, where the hell is this parlay going? We got an example of interpreting something. We get some music theory being deformalized. You know, I think it's reasonable to argue that asymptomatic EyePatchNotes, what you've delineated in your example, is a music theory analysis, but it's just not ironclad music theory or language. I would like to suggest that music theory just isn't ironclad, and this is a very normal way to use it. But I think that your association that would be this stuffy, very formal, prove exactly how it works kind of way is very relevant. Like that's definitely a thing that exists and is a problem, in my opinion, for enjoying and interpreting music. And you seem to think it is too, so I wanted to dig into that more. So stay with me. I promise this is going somewhere. You've got an author's thoughts section. You said this parlay is a bit of a revisit of many parlay and archive parlay, the mini ones in the stream that we do. Layered listening, as EyePatchNotes calls it, generally means going into a known song with intent to isolate one of its musical elements. Could be the lyrics, could be the drums, could be the bass. From incidental music theory exposure, it seems like I might enjoy what's called 4-on-the-floor progression broadly. Do I really? Not from this Wikipedia page. Formal music theory is, to me, in the same vein as, quote, this dish is only enjoyable because of the inosinic acid from the chicken, unquote. Could it be true? Possibly. Would this knowledge be practical and actionable? Not to the layperson, I would argue. Yeah, and so this is the problem to me. I feel a kinship with that comment, EyePatchNotes. It sounds to me like you're complaining about this group of people who over-formalize things and then say, the way that quote you gave is really good. The dish is good because I know the name of the chemical. Obviously not. The tasty taste I'm tasting contains the chemical, inosinic acid. Sure. And then the question is, well, but who cares, except for the masturbatory self-interestedness, unless you can actually use that information. Now, I don't know what inosinic acid is. Here you've linked it. Let's take a look. Inosinic acid is a nucleotide used as a flavor enhancer. It's typically obtained from chicken byproducts. and you could probably add more of it to chicken or something. And there it is. Oh, disodium inosinate I've heard of, which only helps a little bit. Anyway, okay, it's a nucleotide, which tend to taste savory, sure, if I remember correctly. But without the dish is enjoyable because the chef used X technique, and then you could explain like which boosts the amount of inosinic acid, which is a flavor maybe we associate with like the savoriness of chicken. That would be an explanation where it's like, oh, well, okay, that is unarguably useful. If you say it that way, you can do that technique, and I can explain scientifically how it will reliably make the chicken taste better. I'm sure you wouldn't argue that that isn't useful. It very clearly is. You can just go do it and use it. You can clearly use it. The problem then is that this version of using this theory is applying it in a way where you claim that just knowing the causality somehow is then better than not, without getting any utility from it, sure. And I would definitely agree more broadly. I hope I'm not overly speaking for you and strengthening your claim in a way you don't intend to. But I would go so far as to agree that, yeah, like, theory in general is overrated in a sense, in the sense that it's often suggested that it is valuable to know what these things are formally called without taking the step of making sure you actually get something out of knowing that thing. But let's check the other example you gave. 4 on the floor is a great example. I happen to already know what this is. It's pretty straightforward. It's usually 4/4 time signature music that has the drum beat or like a heavy beat on each of the 4 beats of the measure. Very simple. If you think of a metronome going bup, 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 bup for a piece of music, 4 on the floor is kick drum, kick drum, kick drum, kick drum. That's it. If that sounds like, wait, isn't that just every song? A lot of music will do something significantly less precise and put the note like a little bit before the beat or like halfway through the beat, or you'll get something like swing, or the music will be syncopated, which is that thing where the notes are sort of interwoven. So there's not everything happening on the same exact moment. Things are kind of woven together a little bit. 4 on the floor tends to not do those things and instead is bup, 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 bup. Just another example of a common like bass drummy or drum progression. You might be familiar with breakbeat, or you might not be familiar with the term breakbeat, but you might have heard it before. This is which, if you have not noticed before, if you think about that, the next 10 or so songs you listen to, it's pretty popular. You'll probably hear it somewhere. Now, knowing those formalized concepts is not in and of itself good. Our society idolizes, fetishizes knowing things for the sake of knowing them, knowledge for the sake of knowledge, when it's not impressive or useful to just know things. We all have phones in our pocket. You can just look it up on the Library of Alexandria that we all carry around, that, you know, we're given at birth or whatever's going on now with phones. It's not like impressive or noteworthy to have memorized a bunch of minutia. I don't. I just have a brain that retains that information more easily, and it's pointless. And I've always been annoyed that that's pointless. And so I, for a long time in my life, have insisted on, well, what is it good for? What is that information good for? Stop remembering those things, I always think to people. I dated this person in high school who was very obsessed with trivia. They had this fixation on, like, I know a specifically useless fact that, like, you could never possibly have found out. And I think that is what I would like to thank that person. That's what broke me on this subject. Around the time I entered college, I just could not stand it anymore and tore through the English department like the little stinker that I am, telling people that it doesn't do anything to just say that concept. You need to explain what it does. And a lot of the time, it doesn't. So for this section of the parlay, I would like to broadly agree, and maybe even agree with something stronger than what you're trying to claim, EyePatchNotes, that theory is kind of overrated in a strange way. People think that theory is good in and of itself, but have not done their homework to check that it, the way I always say this, is converts into amenities, that you get some kind of amenity for knowing that thing is the moment where it actually matters. Now, just because you can't see where something would be useful right away is not necessarily a robust reason for skepticism, sure. We can understand that scientific discoveries can be valuable without us immediately knowing what we're going to do with them, and eventually it will come up in some bizarre way. Chemistry and physics are connected. And it's the same with music, where having some idea of, okay, basically one of the things that will be different between pieces of music is will be the time signature of the music, or what are some types of drum kit pattern that people will use. Could that be helpful? I think it very clearly can. You can just, as you did, look up Four on the Floor, let's say, on Wikipedia or whatever, check what genres use that a lot, and then go listen to them. Now, I'm not sure that in and of itself is done. You now get a benefit. You may not like the music that is all four on the floor E, that has that progression in it, but it will narrow it down that little bit more. And I'm sure you just argued that layered listening is good, so I'm sure I don't have to convince you of this. Clearly, it will lead to benefits to be able to pursue specific parts of music or specific approaches to making music, we're getting there, that you enjoy. Surely that clearly is beneficial. Do you like this progression just because you know the name of it? Well, clearly no, but I figure the reason you looked it up was because you were interested in seeing if you could break it down further and pursuing that line of reasoning far enough. I mean, yeah, there are reasons people like the music they like, reasons you can find. And I think that that's the thing that for both of these arguments, I see as being the crux of the conflict. I believe that most humans do not believe the thing that I just said, that there basically is a reason that people like what they like. Most people might agree with that if I logically explained it to them, but they don't really feel emotionally that that is true. But I think it very clearly is. You can take the time to demonstrate that it is. And once you've had the experience that going far enough down, there are reasons why we like the things we like. And once you know them, you have control over them. You can go get more of that thing once you've actually correctly identified it, often involving some guesses where you're not actually sure if it's four on the floor progression or some other aspect of the song. Once you've actually found the things that seem to be the core of what you do enjoy, you can go get more of them, usually pretty easily. Genres nowadays will catalog the types of techniques that are common in them, so you definitely will be able to find more music like that. Also, you can change those tastes. Now that you know what it is, you can pretty precisely notice where you're interested in something similar but not quite the same, and then maybe jump onto that. It means that when you like a song that feels novel to you, you're more likely to notice, oh, it's novel because it uses this beat progression, which is kind of similar to the one that I was really enjoying, but it's just this little twist, and I really like that. And then you can go get more of it right now, not in like 5 years when you eventually figure that out. That is fun. And it also means that your life happens faster. You sort of in aggregate end up living slightly more than you otherwise would have by causing yourself to move as a human being, naturally changing over the course of your life at a higher speed, a slightly higher speed. And I suppose it's possible that people here might not agree that they want that, but that is at this point outside the purview of this parlay. I would certainly like to discuss that. Is it actually good to move faster, like in the way you change as a human being in your life? I think definitely yes, but I think there's probably good arguments that no, that's bad. That sounds interesting to discuss, right? Suffice to say, it sounds like you are interested in basically every step of this process, but you take issue with the formalization of it. And I wanted to suggest that perhaps it is overused. That formalization is overused. If I were to be critical, and I hope I don't offend you by saying this, I honestly believe that you are a little bit over blaming the formal concept as if it's actually bad because there is a way to formalize it, when in fact it's just that people don't demonstrate the benefit of the formalization enough. And what you're doing is just good music theory, where you actually explain what you think the payoff of the thing is. Actually, you explain what the payoff of the thing is as far as you feel it is better in this next part. So let's get down there in a sec. For new blood to enter into the parlay, we've got some wub-wubs. Blood. Consider this particular version of a song called Ejectro, again, link in the description, from the Brynhildr adaptation. The Brynhildr anime adaptation? Not recommended. Yeah, if that's what you mean, I don't recommend that either. There's a melody heard throughout most of the track, bordering on repetitive. At 1 minute and 45 seconds, the melody is simplified with an initially bare bones drum line, plus a hi-hat. that I'm going to have trouble reproducing meaningfully here, but I know the ones you're talking about. You can jump to 145 in the song. And then they swapped the synth for a guitar. There's been a synth for a lot of the song. For a bit, a couple of measures. We then return to the usual stringy, synthy melody from the opening. For the musical samples appended to this parlay, EyePatchNotes appreciates their approachability. Simple elements are introduced, hidden, and returned later with altered context. An interested but apprehensive composer could lean on musical recombinations rather than flowing from progression to progression. Many anime openings, or what have you, have a complex enough melody that an unlearned listener may be unable to articulate why they like the musicality. Very interesting turn for the parlay. So it seems like part of your frustration with the music theory thing is that it seems like some music is complicated in a way. I'm not sure exactly how to word this, but I think I get, you at least gave me a very interesting idea. It's complex in a way where it is almost impossible to know what you like about the music without formalizing it with formal music theory concepts. And you fear that this will be bad in various ways. And I feel like there's some where it's pretty clear that it would be. For example, it may be harder for people that like that music to find other music that they enjoy, if you care about that. You as an artist may not care about that. I am the type of person where I do care about that kind of thing. When I make a video, I want people to feel like they leave the video, if they liked it, knowing what they liked about it. That matters to me. I like it when the audience feels like they truly gained information about their taste. That's really all we're doing when we do looks around at meta context of being in a parlay. That's all this really is, right? We're just figuring out what our preferences are. So I think it's good to be explicit about that and help the audience know what those preferences are. If you don't like this, I don't want you to feel like I just don't care about the thing that you wanted out of the video. I want you to know that I purposefully didn't include it, or that I failed to include it, but I don't think it would have helped, ideally. In parlay, of course, I just have to guess, but I do the best I can to make it something that the person who requested it would like. And yeah, here I feel like I like the idea, but if you care about it, that it is meaningful to you that people who listen to music you would make would know what they liked about it, would be able to decipher what they liked about it. Not just that they would enjoy it, but that they would know how they enjoyed it in some way. That it would be noticeable how it was enjoyed. This could also be more self-centered, not in a bad way necessarily. You want it to be that when people like your music, they can describe what you did that was clever in it. But no judgment. I'm not saying that as a negative thing. That's fine. I don't think that's bad. Right, I would be sad if in my videos somebody watched the video and thought it wasn't good because there wasn't high production value. He should have tried harder with the production values, but I just don't agree that that's valuable. And so I wasn't trying to do that at all. The video isn't able to be critiqued for being inadequate with its production value because it doesn't have any. And I didn't try to put in any, and no amount of additional work would have caused me to add some. I'm just here to explain my ideas. I don't want the video to look flashy. I want it to deliver the ideas I wanted to give. And if you don't want that, that's okay. But it's like, it's not failing to have good production values. It's an assumption that I don't agree with, that would be better. And I think I can also agree with that perspective here. I think loaded into this idea, again, I hope I'm not reaching too much and putting words in your mouth, is that it's of questionable value when music is interesting because it is more complicated, rather than just doing variations on a theme, if that can be interesting music. And indeed, I noticed in this parlay that a lot of the songs that you've brought up in parlay over the past few music parlay from you have been like this. They're not really introducing like new riffs or a new melodic part of the song. They're mostly moving in and out elements that are already there, or using like very light variations on a theme. They are entertaining and provide variance and novelty throughout their duration, using less elements. There's a less is more thing going on, and it might be that you're saying you value that. That makes sense to me. I don't think it's bad if a piece of music wants to do a lot with a lot rather than a lot with a little, but it is definitely different. I will now notice for the next little while songs that I listen to being more this kind of variations on a theme thing versus like new sonic ideas kind of thing. Very interesting. I agree that is a divide between music, and it probably is demonstrably easier to figure out what you like about music that is the variations on a theme thing. If the music just sets up some tools to create its sound and then changes how they are used or emphasized, not introducing a bunch more, yeah, you're probably a lot more likely to figure out what you like about that piece of music. That seems sensible to me. I think that's probably true in practice. Sure. There's a part of me though that feels like you're then claiming that you like can't when you said the unlearned listener may be unable to articulate why they like the musicality, because the only way to articulate why you like the musicality of a more complex piece would be with music theory terms. And that's going back to that thing I said earlier, where it's almost like you're saying that if you have to say a music theory term, that's bad automatically, that now something bad has happened, which I feel like is the same questionable argument as the people saying it's good just because they can say the music theory term. I would agree that it can be, it's just satisfying to be able to figure out what you like about a piece of music. And that might be for different people less or more enjoyable if the piece of music is doing something more sonically complicated. But I'm not sure the music theory itself really, I'm reminded of a genre or a subgenre, I don't know, called math rock, which is sort of like playing games with time signature and notes and like math of scales. Lightning quick degrees of a scale music theory lesson thing, refresher if you know this already. You know, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Well, basically there's a couple of different steps. Imagine a piano, a couple of different movements between keys that lead you to playing that scale. You play something in the key of G, you hit, 7 or 8 white keys in a row, and there's your key of G. Is that right? Anyway, one of them is all white keys. You'll notice, if you imagine a piano, well, if I hit 8 white keys in a row, some of them have some black keys in between them, and a few of them also don't. And that's because musically, in terms of like the wavelength of the sound that you're hearing, there are slightly different amounts of space between those notes. Some of them are 2 jumps on the piano, you skip a black key, and some of them are only 1 jump. You don't skip a black key, it's just 2 white keys next to each other, if you can imagine that. I hope that makes some sense for people who don't know any music theory at all. And that pattern of jumps versus not jumps can then be moved around, but you can imagine that if you move it down a few notes on the keyboard, you're suddenly going to need to hit some black notes to continue the pattern. You jump a note, but that might lead you to hitting a black key now, and then sometimes you don't jump a note, which might mean that you hit a black and then a white key, or a white and then a black key. And so different scales will, move that pattern around. And there are even modes. Modes I would describe as you change the pattern of the jumps. The overall total, mathematically, is still the same. You hopscotch the same number of squares, but when you do a split jump versus when you jump together is at a different spot in your do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, if that makes sense. Math rock, then, could be described as a genre that plays around with this to create chord progressions that should sound good based on the way humans enjoy cadences, but don't seem intuitive. Like that you wouldn't initially think, oh, a human will naturally play this chord and then that chord, but mathematically that's equivalent to playing this chord, which seems super weird on the surface, but then strum strum, they sound good together, even though, like, why? And it has to do with how we formalize language and the cadences in our voice. When we speak and a thought is coming to a close, there's a certain pattern of cadences that indicates that I'm not done with this thought that you're hearing. And then you say something and it feels more final, and people understand that the thought has ended. There's a different cadence in my voice when the thought is done. You hear that thing? And so musically, yeah, it's this note and then that note, or this chord and then that chord, but it really just needs to be this chord and then that chord that is some interval away from this first chord. And it doesn't really matter that it be that interval away. It just has to be like this amount of jump away. Multiply that by some number, but keep it in the same scale, and you might have a very unexpected chord that suddenly still sounds good, even though it sounds very unexpected, and creates a feeling of anticipation you will not recognize. Now, I hope you can see where I'm going with this. Yeah, that's kind of weird, sure. You can imagine listening to that music and going, maybe I like this, but I won't be able to figure out how. That seems like a genre where the people are purposefully trying to make it so you cannot figure out how you like the piece of music and like why, sort of. I mean, I guess you can create new sounds. There's also a part of me, though, that hopefully it makes sense why some people would like that. It probably sounds novel to a lot of people. I'm sort of jig is up with these kinds of music. Maybe math rock is not the term people use for this, but this is certainly a subgenre of music, often rocky music, that uses this type of technique. And it can be really interesting. I'm sort of not sold either way, personally, when I've listened to these songs. But I can definitely see why you would see it as, if not negative, at least very different of an enjoyment than other types of music. Sure, that is not weird to me. And could it be that this type of music requires formalized music theory to make? Yeah, I would say in that extreme example, yes, it pretty much does, right? The music is basically only made using math and music theory, at least at its core. And then they might do some more, let's call them intuitive or organic techniques to compose other parts of the music. I'm sure those people still do that a lot of the time. But I think you could interpret some of what you're saying about music theory as suggesting that a lot of music is made that way, and like it definitely isn't, though. I don't think you ought to be scared of that as a creator. I think that if you have this way of analyzing things, I mean, for goodness sakes, EyePatchNotes, you counted the measures. you literally wrote the time signature for some of this music. You wrote it out in such a way that it's very clear to me you understand structuring music. If you don't want to call that music theory, that's fine. But like, I think that is the pragmatic form of music theory for most people. Ironclad music theory is just not, that's not what music theory is necessarily. You can do that, but I don't think it's fair to say, therefore music theory is bad. I sort of feel like this is that thing where the extreme end of the spectrum is characterized as that's the normal thing. And like, it's not. Most people who understand, molecular gastronomy don't say this dish is only enjoyable because of the inosinic acid from the chicken. They know that technique and then they like it because it tastes chickeny. And you don't really need to have that chemical knowledge. It just might help target what you're trying to do. I have this chart that I use that is the overlap between foods that have glutamates and then the other chemical that boosts the savoriness of a glutamate. So it's like you combine fish and cheese, which sounds bad, but they have molecules that will make them taste savory in a special way together. Or there's that thing with beef and broccoli. If you eat beef and broccoli together, the broccoli has a compound in it that will make the beef taste more savory in this certain way. And that's very popular in some cuisines. You might have noticed and wondered, that seems kind of random. I'm sure it was kind of random at first, but we now know the chemical mechanism for some of that enjoyment, and you can reapply that information to find more combinations that taste good. But you don't need to focus on the science of the thing. I would argue the theory is the thing you want to convert out of as fast as possible. Learn that that's the case, find the other foods that have those compounds, and then stop using the theoretical concept and just show pictures of the foods. And then when you're cooking something, I have this in my kitchen, you can look at the chart and see, oh, I'm cooking this and we have some broccoli, let's just throw it in. And that's it. Like, and that is definitely very actionable. I don't think the theory is bad. And you don't have to say this food is enjoyable because of the chemical synergy between these two things. It's enjoyable because these flavors go well together. Part of what's happening is these two chemicals are combining. If people say, what's that weird flavor? Well, because of the theory, now you can identify that, which is helpful sometimes. And they can draw a parallel. But I think it's completely reasonable, in short, to be critical and frustrated by the over-fixation on the theoretical elements without what I call converting them into amenities, making it actually useful. Yes, this is people just masturbating and wanting to seem smart because they know a fancy word, and that in and of itself is bad, but that doesn't make the concept bad. And there's some baby thrown out with the bathwater thing here that I will defend, and I hope that doesn't sound overly critical. I'm not exactly sure how you feel on what I would argue is a more balanced version of the theory is useful, but like in context, when you can apply it type of argument. You didn't say anything about that here, and I relate to your complaint about people over theorizing. So I don't want to put words in your mouth any more than I already have, any more than Parley is you see what words I would put in your mouth. Take me out to dinner first. There's a few more things to finish up with on before we go. But I just wanted to give a final example. I jumped around a lot in this parlay purposefully. You mentioned an artist we talked about in a previous game, artist Cosmograph, having contributed to Chrono Arc. In addition to Nikke, Hope for Existence and End of Light also tend to introduce changes every 8 measures. We are still trying to avoid formal music theory or sheet music, stay with me, but you just said every 8 measures. I feel like you're just using it in a more balanced way. Anyway, the dramatic chanting 90 seconds in can be used as a metronome and introduces the drums after 16 counts. 16 beats, I guess. Forgotten King will periodically imprison an investigator and execute them after 4 turns. The chanting and drums evoke a countdown now, do they not? And this line gave me a bolt in my brain that it kind of sounds like you're arguing that this variations on a theme, not too formalized way of making music and reorganizing sounds helps the music be thematic a little bit, which I think is an interesting idea. Certainly, over-focusing on theory could make you not think about these things, or put that theme in the song, but in a way that won't come out. You remember at the beginning of the parlay we talked about, it's a piece of video game boss music. Are you really going to notice something if it's too subtle? And so they aren't that subtle, but it's still balanced out. And hopefully then the player kind of feels what the music is giving them while they're enjoying the boss fight, or it just sounds good and pairs with the action. Could that work well? I certainly felt when I fought the Forgotten King boss in Chrono Arc that breakdown part with the chanting, and then after about 4 measures or so, it changes, and then someone gets executed. Did that feel like a build-up, or you have a moment where if your investigator is imprisoned, and then that part of the song starts soon after, won't you just intuitively feel a little bit like, oh, I'm screwed. That character is screwed. Yeah, totally. I felt that way. And could this be because of this style of constructing music where it's more about variations on the theme that is there rather than new melodic ideas, or over contriving with music theory to create like a completely new sound, but that isn't going to elegantly fit into any of the person's experience, certainly in a video game soundtrack? Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable argument. I hope you don't mind that I moved it around a lot. That is the way I was able to understand it, and I thought I would show my work wandering my way through that understanding. I did ultimately skip some addendums to the parlay, one of which was really interesting, so I wanted to call it out, and there's a link in the description. Stronghold Land Eater is actually a remix of a song that is much more lyric forward. That is fascinating. I enjoyed listening to that and hearing it's kind of the same lyrical ideas. There's just a lot more lyrics. And this song prioritizes the vocals. Stronghold Land Eater has them as kind of an accent or an instrument, but sort of more vocals than that usually has, but still not a lot. And so it was interesting to hear it is indeed a subset of a song with full vocals and, emphasized lyrics is how I would describe it. That's pretty cool. So there's a link in the description to that. And then finally, you've got a little game. You said Stronghold Land Eater has 2 more instruments or sounds in phase 1 that really sell the piece to me, but were not brought up in the main body of the parlay. If you're up for a little meta mini game, and then there's 2 spoilered out sections. 2 pieces of the instrumentalization in Stronghold Land Eater in phase 1, so the first 1.5 minutes, that you did not bring up in the main parlay that I think are a key part of the feel of the song. I feel like there's a pretty low chance I'm gonna get that, but I'll try. Sure, that's fun. Okay, so which ones did you mention? We'll try to narrow it down a little bit. So the lyrics you mentioned, the drum beat, you kind of wrote that out, and then the choir, the chanting, and synth, which is a lot of it. Well, there's a part at the beginning where there's this string melody, pretty quiet in the background, that you'll hear, I think like 40 seconds in or like a minute in or so, I don't remember exactly. That's that kind of infamous like Final Destination showdown kind of melody is the association I have with that. I don't have great pitch, sorry, but hopefully that like brings it back enough if you listen to the song or you've heard something similar. That happens partway through the song quite quietly. I actually think that part of the song is a little tone breaking is not the exact word I'm looking for, but I was amused to find it in there. And I bet it, if you removed it, I bet it would feel a little bit less video gamey. It would feel a little bit too like epic fantasy-y, maybe. Maybe that actually is really good in context. I'm not sure. I'd have to see it both ways. So that I'll guess that one for one of them. That string, I believe it starts as strings, riff. And then, ooh, what else? There's like some little, you said instruments slash sounds. Maybe that's a hint. There's like some little accent noises in the beginning of the song that add to the, this is done a lot with Christmas music, which is part of why I'm thinking of it now. You know, sleigh bells will just be shaking in the background, usually as part of the drum kit. And that subtly makes the song feel more Christmassy. I saw this really interesting video recently from a music theory but applied YouTuber that I listened to, that he does this gimmick where the video is to the rhythm of music, including what he says in the video. Everything he narrates in the video is to music, is music, sort of, melodically or rhythmically spoken. It's interesting. You'd think that would be too much, but I personally think he got the balance just right. Anyway, that's cool. And he did a video about like Christmasifying anything. So finding the sort of core aesthetic elements that people add to music to make it sound Christmassy, and then what if you add those to music that otherwise is completely unrelated to the holidays, and then does it sound that way? And yeah, it totally does. Not a lot of those elements are like melodies, you know, like progressions of notes, and so that's pretty promising. Even if it was a progression of notes, a lot of the time those can be woven into a surprising variety of things. And if you played a lot of video games often really like the holidays. It lets the game do a nice themed update. People spend money on the holidays, you know, bada bing, bada boom. I don't know. You can figure out why video games like holidays. Lots of video games celebrate the holidays. And so if you play some darker video games, a particular favorite example of this of mine is Limbus Company, which, like, why is there Christmas events in Limbus Company? Like, that just doesn't, that could not be less related to the theme of that game, but they're there, and they're also like in universe. They're not just blatantly Christmas. They are blatantly Christmas, but they're like, there's an in-universe explanation. They put a weird amount of effort into explaining why Christmassy things are happening, and so their variation in this like kind of psychological horror, broody, dark, dour, depressing game environment, how they do Christmas music is like, whoa. And so where I'm going with this is it like there's like some bells and stuff in part of Stronghold Land Eater at the beginning? Surely, honestly, I'm like 1/3 guessing that's in there. But my point is that when you have choir and you want to make something sound like that, they almost always put like a church bell in there. You know what I mean? Something like that. So yeah, those are my guesses. Let's see what I got. So sorry, again, it's the ba 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 ba, that string line. It's quite quiet in Stronghold Land Eater. And then there's, I'm again like 1/3 guessing, but I feel like I remember there being a bell in the beginning, probably only a few times, or like, again, as part of the drum kit is a common thing. A church bell is the kind of thing they would do. Let's click the spoilers. Oh, yes, one hit. The first one is the church like bells. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to listen to the song again after this. That is in there. I didn't hallucinate that. Employed occasionally, but not predictably, they're an audial threat for me since they add some gravitas to a boss theme. Sure, and I bet they're early in the song. Like, that's a really common thing as well. If you've heard songs that will use those brooding, somber bells, they're often, I like the way you worded it, like audial threat is kind of badass, but also sort of don't cut yourself on that edge. Very foreshadowing, right? Very foreboding. Cool. Imagine the effect. You run D&D, play a church bell, dong, dong, like 3 or 6 times at the beginning of your D&D session. Don't explain it at all and do things as normal. Imagine how much more attention players will pay to the plot. Anyway, the second one I got wrong. You said it's some indicator or alarm rings. Just twice. There's a 3-part tone hidden behind the chanting. Measures 22 and 30 approximately. Very helpful, the helpful version of music theory analysis, by the way. I'll have to go back and take a look at that. I left the spoilers unclicked when I prepared for this parlay, but Cool. And we love a little game at the end of the parlay, as long as you're okay with me almost certainly getting it wrong. And I guess I got one of them. Again, to be honest, that was like a little bit of a guess, though. I just thought, well, choir, and then there's that like Christmas association thing. They probably put a church bell in there, didn't they? But I feel like I remember one. We'll see when I listen back. Will I go, oh yeah, or will I go, huh? I guess there was a church bell. We'll see. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I covered it in a kind of weird way to demonstrate things the way I was able to understand them, but I thought this parlay was a very interesting idea. I like this perspective that there's sort of two major, at least, ways to organize music. That is by sort of moving its elements, simple elements, in and out, introducing, hiding them, and then later returning them with different context, recontextualizing the elements. And that's kind of separate from making new melodic ideas or progressions of notes. And neither is really necessarily better or worse. But one advantage of doing the simple elements recontextualized thing is that it's probably a lot easier to figure out what you like about a piece of music or notice patterns in music you listen to. That's certainly possible with other music, but I would agree with you, it becomes more complicated. And there is even music that exists that I would reckon is virtually impossible to identify what you like about it without using the music theory to recreate the math work of the people who made it. Pretty interesting. What a bizarre parlay, by the way. Delightful. Folks, if you'd like to ask for your own parlay about anything you like, it can be short or long, obscure or typical, and I even post a few ideas every month that are just things I was interested in. So if you want to just have a little podcast that's about ideas you're a little more interested in, you can pick one of those. You can write your own prompt. It doesn't have to be that you write a video essay and then I go off of it, but that's fine too. You can get one using a link in the description. We'd love to have you. Looking forward to the next one. Go Christmasify some songs for me. Maybe don't.